Hey everybody, it's Julie. Welcome to Hello Monday. Today I'm going to be playing with Memento dye inks, and this is a very versatile water-based dye ink that comes in a great range of colors. They also come in a pigment format, and I just wanted to show you the difference between the dye inks and the pigment inks. Now the dye inks have a raised felt pad so you can ink up any size stamp, and they have a linen coating or fabric coating on the top, whereas the pigment inks, which are a stickier ink that's often used for embossing, it's a thicker ink and it's going to come on a foam pad. As you can see here, the Memento dye inks are also available in a dewdrop format, which is like a mini ink pad, and you can use it for getting into tighter spots or selective inking on your stamps, and they're great for portability if you like to travel with your stamps and your inks. Now I'm going to start with an A2 card. I'm going to mask off the gutter crease there with a post-it note just so I know what kind of area I'm working in as I build my layout. And I'm going to prime these solid images. These are 3 hearts that I mounted simultaneously to an acrylic block. They're from the All Inside stamp set, and I just like their fun shape. And I'm going to prime the stamps with a Versamark ink pad, and this is something I'm going to like stamp off a little bit onto scratch paper or wipe it off with my fingers, but it's just going to leave a nice little film or coating on the surface of the stamp so that water-based dye inks will grip to the surface of the stamp. And this is something common with clear stamps, especially if they're solid and you're working with a water-based dye ink. Sometimes they bead up on the surface of the stamp, and priming those stamps can help that ink get a much smoother, even application. So prime your stamps first before you use a water-based ink, and you should be good to go. Now you'll notice that sometimes I end up stamping a second time before I re-ink, and that gives me a second generation impression. That works great with water-based dye inks. This is something you can't always do with permanent dye inks, because they dry so fast and they lock the color in so fast that you can't get the residual ink to stamp again on the surface of your paper. So that's one of the great versatile things about the Memento dye inks. Now you'll notice sometimes I stamp with full intensity. That's a first generation impression. And then sometimes I will stamp off onto the scratch paper and then stamp onto my card front to get that second generation. You can even get a third generation impression if you want to huff on the stamp, and that's like breathing with moist air right onto the stamp after you've stamped, and that just re-moistens the ink, and it kind of sounds like this. So, you know, hot, heavy breathing. That sounds bad, doesn't it? But it's not. So you can do that to get multiple impressions before you re-ink, and it just looks like they're fading, or almost looks like another color of ink. Now when you're done, you can and want to switch colors, you can stamp off all the ink, or you can clean it very quickly with a baby wipe or paper towel and water, and then add your next color so you don't cross-contaminate. I started light to dark with my inks, so I didn't worry too much about cross-contamination by the time I was switching those colors, but it was necessary there between the red and the purple inks, because I was really worried I'd get red ink, residual ink, into my lilac posies. And I didn't have the full-size pad, so I'm just using the dewdrop. So then I cleaned off the stamps and just removed the other larger stamps, and I'm just using the smallest one of the trio, and I'm inking up and adding just a few more of those lilac posy hearts there just to create the balance. And this is kind of a personal preference. You just go until you've filled it up and it feels balanced, looks balanced to your eye. And then because it dries so fast, I can just flip it over, and I'm going to take my Teflon bone folder and crease that fold line so it's nicely folded. And I'm going to take the same white cardstock. I started out with a Card Shop Marshmallow, I think it was. And I'm going to die cut the dove shape from the Bird Shapes die set that we released at the holidays. It's part of the Essentials by Ellen Line. And I'm going to use the bitty envelopes that we released last spring to do one of the tiny little envelopes. And I'm also going to come in and stamp a greeting, and I borrowed this from a Hero Art stamp set that they just released. It's one of the add-on sets from the My Monthly Hero set. It's available at ellenhudson.com. And I'm going to ink up with VersaFine Onyx Black. Now this is a fast-drying pigment ink because I wanted a very deeply saturated black to really be visible over the top of those dye inks and really pop there. Now I'm going to take one of the little tiny hearts. There's actually a little image of these falling hearts, and I only needed the super teeny tiniest one. So I'm going to do a little bit of stamp surgery and trim it away. And don't worry, I can always put them back together, mount them together on a block if I want to use them all together again. And then I'm going to use a Post-it note to get a hold of that little teeny tiny die cut envelope. Now you can't see it on camera, but there are score lines or embossing lines on the die that actually create the embossed effect of the envelope flap. And you can't see it on camera, but it's there, and I'm using that to determine where I want to put my little heart seal there. So I'm going to ink up with love letter and get that little heart stamped on there. So it looks like the envelope is sealed with a heart on the front. And then I'm going to go ahead and put some foam mounting tape there on the back of all of these die cut shapes so I can get that mounted into place. And I'm using my tweezers because it's a lot easier for me to see over the layout where that's going to get positioned and make sure I get it where I want it. And then I can go ahead and mount the envelope, and I'm just going to tuck the edge of that right under the bird's beak. It's a lot easier to do it that way than to try to glue them together and then mount them together. So I'm just kind of faking it there by tucking it underneath. And then for some embellishment, I decided to take this glitter tape. It's so pretty, and just add a little bit of glitz there to my card. I'm going to cut a strip, but this is a little bit wide. It's wider than I wanted, so I've put it onto a cutting mat, and I'm using the grid lines there with the cutting mat to make sure I'm going to cut it straight in half. And I've got a metal edge ruler here, and I'm just going to take my craft knife and go straight down the middle there and just split it in half, and then I'll save the leftover piece there for something else. But I can just get under there with my craft knife and lift that up off the surface, and then I tore the edge for a decorative finish. I sometimes like to do that instead of trimming it, and this stuff will actually tear with your fingertips, which is kind of cool. And then I'm just going to wind that around to the back side. So it'll be tucked on the inside there instead of trimming off the excess. I like to do that. And I'm going to take some neon flamingo stickles just to embellish that little tiny red heart there. And I just squeezed a little drop of it because it is a small image. And then I'm just going to spread it around there with the finest tip of my styluses. And then I can use that also as kind of a squeegee to get any excess that kind of overflowed off the heart, so it's all contained right there. Here you can see a close-up of how beautiful these colors look and the great saturation and variation of color you can get with these dye inks. I love the effect. I thought it made an excellent background here for my dove with his little letter delivering love. So you can see more still shots at the Classroom blog, and all the supplies are available at ellenhudson.com. Thanks for watching.